process glucose very normally. So that's why somebody that's 16, lean and mean, that's an athlete, they can eat a pecan pie and not gain a pound of weight, where somebody that's diabetic or pre-diabetic can walk by a pecan pie and gain weight. And so what happens, the research is pretty clear too, that in between that, there's a level, they call it metabolic syndrome, and has other things involved in it, but research shows, several major studies that show there's a direct correlation during that process as somebody goes from being lean and mean and young to overweight, obese, and insulin resistant. That trip that they take is directly related to muscle to body fat composition. So the more muscle you have, the more your muscle takes up the glucose in your diet and keeps you from having insulin resistance. So it's very, very positive for us to build muscle for that reason, and maintain muscle throughout your life. It allows you to eat some bad carbs and take care of it, like when you were young, if you have more muscle. So wherever somebody is on that, that's what they could have in the way of carbohydrates. So it's a moving target. If they've had a fight with their spouse, if they've had a stressful day, if they're not getting enough sleep, that also impacts insulin resistance. So we can't just say, hey, this is what you need to eat afterwards. What a good recommendation would be is a handful of cashews, getting about 20 to 25 grams of protein. We know that's very positive within 30 minutes of training, but the amount of carbohydrates you can have is a moving target. The mere fact that you're getting protein with the carbs negates the glycemic impact of the carbohydrates, but depending on where someone is on that metabolic syndrome X scale determines how many carbs they can get. For most people, they can probably have some carbohydrates along with it, as long as it's not that high glycemic, straight sugar type of carbohydrate afterwards. Where somebody's young, lean, and mean, they can probably have some high glycemic carbs along with the protein, and they're still going to maintain and not shut down that growth hormone release from exercise.
Now, I know you talked about the importance of having L-glutamine 2 grams before you do Sprint 8. L-glutamine has a fantastic reputation. I know you said it in the book, but I thought maybe just a brief couple of seconds of why before.
Well, there's quite a few studies now. There's really a body of research on L-glutamine, but the major researchers show that 2 grams, I know sometimes bodybuilders will take 5 to 30 grams a day, and people are throwing it down. But what the research shows, when you're looking at the growth hormone release impact, if you take it before training, 30 minutes to an hour before training, that can truly help facilitate the release of exercise-induced growth hormone. A lot of times L-glutamine is taken after exercise, and the reason why is when you exercise, your blood glutamine levels drop straight down. If you take it prophylactically before, then you probably have a better shot at releasing more growth hormone during the workout, and when rather than it just dropping straight down and you not have a lot of energy at the end of the workout, more probably than not, you will have more energy because your blood glutamine levels are a little bit higher. They still drop. Don't get me wrong. They still drop pretty quickly, but they drop a little bit slower if you take the L-glutamine before. And 2 grams of L-glutamine, I remember my son and I bought a little keg of it, and it lasts for $23, and it lasted something like 9 months. It's very inexpensive, but you'll find a lot of people say that's a weenie dose, but there's a couple studies that suggest that taking too much L-glutamine can clog up the process as well. So what we know is 2 grams is safe. One of the researchers that cites 2 grams in his research said, but in a white paper to incoming athletes at a major university telling them how they can get the edge on training to beat other athletes in competition is actually taking between 2 and 3 grams. The research says 2. Same researcher that says 2 in his research says to athletes take 2 to 3, but probably 5 grams or more. It would more probably than not clog the process, and where you don't get the benefit. So L-glutamine is very, very positive before. So the recommendation in the book, which is based on several mainstream studies, would say 2 grams before.
One of the things I really appreciate about what you do and the way you steward what you do is that you're all about the results and you're all about the evidence, which I love. It's not just a synthesis of your opinions. You're down deep in the research, the most current research, which I love and appreciate, and I'm sure the audience will. It is an interesting thing to note that the oxygen debt is comparable to releasing the HGH, that there's something about oxygen debt when you do this at high intensity that releases HGH. And I would imagine also that there are people out there thinking, well, if I go at this high of an intensity, even for 30 seconds, wouldn't that put the heart at risk? And yet in your book, correct me if I'm wrong, you wrote about how it decreases your risk.
It will over time. Now, you always have to caution if someone has an issue concerning their heart. We always want to send them to their physician to make sure they're cleared for that. But it's interesting to note that just last month, Wall Street Journal had a major report where they cited what's happening at Mayo Clinic and a study in Norway where they actually do for people that have had heart attacks within about 2 days, they're using now anaerobic Sprint 8 type training.
That's good to know. That's very, very good to
know. That's so while we don't want to practice medicine, somebody has an issue with a heart, go get that checked out. But if you think about it, the heart basically has two processes, an aerobic process and an anaerobic process. So we see athletes all the time as well as adults. They can do things aerobically because they've conditioned their heart muscle for the anaerobic parts of life. But where we get in trouble is the anaerobic things in life. Your daughter's just been in a car wreck. But when you do Sprint 8, you're conditioning your heart muscle to handle those hard, stressful high burst of intensity moments in life. So can't help but think that's going to help every adult long term. Now, you don't want to have a heart attack doing that, but you want to slowly start with Sprint 8 and think in terms of the heart has two processes. I want to be conditioned for both processes. And the way you do that is Sprint 8 basically is an hour a week of exercise, an hour a week of aerobic exercise, of which 12 minutes is anaerobic. And that's all it takes because it lines up with your ATP synergy system. It lines up with your fat-switch muscle fiber that's not meant to endure. So you don't have to work it in an endurance system. You just have to recruit it to make sure it's worked for brief moments at a time. And that's why Sprint is almost the perfect way to do that. But our 30-second rule is if you can go longer than 30 seconds, you probably didn't work your heart muscle anaerobically. But it needs to be the type thing that you're going so hard and fast that at 10 seconds you're saying, holy smoke, I can't believe I listened to Southerner taught me in doing this. At 15 seconds you want off of it, and those last 5 seconds seem like they take forever, and you just barely finish the 30-second sprint, then you're doing it correctly. That's the Sprint 8. That's the type of exercise you have to do in order to get this huge release of growth hormone that actually mimics taking injections of it.
Difficult question. I'm sure you're asked it all the time, but how is this different than interval training? Because it sounds similar, but it's not.
If you're talking to an Olympic coach, it's going to be very similar to the same thing. But when you talk to anybody, I've worked with over 18,000 athletes over the last 30-something years now, and when I say interval training, it's interpreted as slightly increasing intensity and going for a minute. If you can go for more than 30 seconds, you're not recruiting that fast-twitch fiber. So it would be a sprint interval, but interval training gets interpreted being far less intensity. When we use the term sprint cardio, which is what it really is, it makes interval training look like kindergarten versus college. This is really, really demanding. It's the hardest exercise you can do, but with that, you get this huge release of growth hormone, condition both processes of your heart muscle, work all three muscle fiber types, and and you get unbelievable results with it.
That was a good explanation. Another thing that you talked about that I felt was very important is antioxidants. Now, how does the release of this level of growth hormone relate to the realm of antioxidants and free radicals? Because this is very important. People are given such different information. Don't exercise too hard. You'll create too many free radicals. What's the story on this from your view?
There's a couple of different ways to look at it. Probably the mainstream way would be from the mitochondria. Like what we know at the cellular level is that if we were to do a biopsy of your vascular this big muscle on the side of your thigh, that most people would have about 6 mitochondria per cell. And And the research is clear. When you do, research say